Hey, this is Kid Kash, and you're listening to the Working Fan Podcast. Check it out.
It's the Working Fans Podcast. It's the man they call Dave, and I'm here today. We got a special guest, a former ECW TV champion, former TNA X Division champion and tag champion, also a former WWE Cruiserweight champion. Guy's done it all. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only KIDD, Kid Kash. Mr. Kash, how are you today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, sir. I'm good. I saw you started out in 1989. I know you were trained by Ricky Morton and Tim Horner. Were you always a lifelong wrestling fan, though?
Yeah, you know, I watched it. I grew up in Central Virginia, and I grew up on NWA, and that's all we got. Every now and then, you know, we would get like Georgia Championship Wrestling, you know, but that would be like really late at night on a certain channel, you know, and stuff like that. So, that, I mean, I watched it, you know, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so, you know, I had a lot of land and stuff like that, and, you know, horses and stuff. So we worked a lot as kids, you know, out there in the fields and stuff like that. And but whenever I did get a chance to watch it, I did like it, you know, and had my favorites.
So were you very familiar with Ricky Morton?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I grew whenever, like I said, I was 70s and 80s, so whenever, I don't know, probably about 1985 or 6, it's probably when I first saw them, and it was NWA, brought those guys in, and yeah.
Yeah, that's the time,
watch them.
that's the time I started following NWA as well, was during that Rock and Roll Express, Four Horsemen kind of era. Yeah. What was it like training with Ricky, Tim Horner? Did they ever give you any really good advice that you still use today, out of the ring and in the ring?
Yeah, you know, just take your time. Just take your time, man. You know, don't overload yourself, and, you know, listen to the crowd, you know, that kind of stuff. But which, you know, not that I wrestle anymore, you know, but it kind of works in life, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Have you been able to get any independent dates with everything going on, or?
I haven't been looking for any. I retired in 2015.
Okay.
And I was out until about 2000, late 18, and I just started doing a few shows here and there, you know, just, you know, once every 3 or 4 months, you know, just for some people that I knew, and, you know, didn't have to drive far or anything like that, you know, just something to, you know, just kind of be a part of it still in a way, you know, and mostly being more of an agent kind of guy back in their dressing rooms. I was doing UCW for a while, you know, down in Georgia, and, you know, they draw big crowds, and he had like a lot of big name stars and stuff like that on the show. So him and myself and Kevin Sullivan would kind of run the dressing room, and we were doing TV tapings and stuff like that. So Kevin was running kind of like all the TV kind of stuff, you know, and then I was running the dressing room as far as, you know, the guys and, you know, critiquing the younger guys and, you know, that kind of thing. So I kind of like doing that. And plus, I still do seminars, things of that nature, you know. I get booked on those quite a bit. So, but I have a real job, you know. I'm a project superintendent for a pretty large construction company, and we build hotels and things like that, you know, and high rises and stuff. So I just wrestle here and there, you know, and have the insurance and the, you know, good paycheck. So I don't want to mess any of that up.
Yeah, absolutely. You keep yourself in good shape. I saw you do a few like things with TNA, like maybe a couple months ago they had something with you on where there was like Moose or something, I want to say. And
yeah, they brought me down, and it was just for a couple of days, you know. Didn't hardly know anybody at all. I mean, just as far as the staff goes, you know, like Chris Sabin and D'Lo Brown and, you know, guys like that. But pretty much everybody else, I was like, wow, it's been a long time, you know. But yeah, I mean, I'm still keeping in shape, you know, and I train, you know, pretty much every day, and still do, you know, martial arts training, and, you know, working out in the mornings and stuff before I go to work and stuff, you know.
Yeah, you were training before
you got into domestic stuff.
You were always training even before you got into pro wrestling, right? You were always big into martial arts and boxing and stuff, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I was boxing when I was 7 years old. My dad was a boxer. He boxed after Vietnam. He boxed in the Navy through the rest of his time, you know, and picked up on that. And when I was about 7 years old, we started started training with him a little bit, doing the Pee Wee Boxing League, and teenage stuff, and then started taking martial arts at about 10 years old, and then started, wrestling in school and, things like that. I never played football or baseball, but wrestled and, boxed and did Krav Maga and Aikido.
Wow. I always heard that, I always remember reading stories and stuff like that you were a guy who could handle himself if anything ever went wrong. So I guess it probably helped you out, in the wrestling business, if anyone tried to take advantage of you, I'd imagine.
It did, and at first, Ricky and, Tim and the rest of the people that had a lot, with my training and stuff, they, at first they were telling me to always respect the veterans and just listen to them and, things of that nature. So, a couple of the older guys back in the day, whenever I was young and stuff, I'd show up with Ricky or Tim or somebody like that. So if I wrestled them, they would just beat the living shit out of you, and they just hammer you. And I just thought that's the way wrestling was supposed to be, So I would just start giving it back. And then I noticed that once I started giving it back a little bit, they lightened up a whole lot, But as far as taking the beating, it wasn't a big deal for me, because I was used to that kind of physical abuse, just in all the training growing up, still do to this day, as a matter of fact.
One thing, I'm a big MMA and boxing fan as well as pro wrestling, and one thing I feel like pro wrestlers don't always get the respect they deserve for their toughness in that community. And I was looking at like some of the injuries, a lot of Kurt Angle, he's had a lot of injuries in pro wrestling. And I was looking at you, in the beginning, you had a point in your career, early on, you broke both your ankles in a match.
Yeah, I was in the WWE in Chattanooga in a tag team match, and we did Hurricanranas, turnbuckle to turnbuckle, across from each other. And Scotty Too Hottie didn't let go of my leg. So when we did the full turn, he wound up literally, it messed him up too. I think it hurt his neck and shoulder, but yeah, he was completely upside down and landed on the back of both of my ankles. But I was able and tough enough, I guess, to walk out of the ring. I didn't want to be carried, so as bad as it was and as painful as it was, I walked out of the ring and up the ramp and in the back.
I was wondering about that. I was if you get both your ankles broken, if you're able to, again, that goes to you were used to being able to take a lot of punishment too, and probably had a better pain tolerance than most people.
I think the public is more fixated on the fake part of it than really, thinking about what it really takes to be a good pro wrestler and the things we go through and what we put our bodies through. I'm almost 51, so I'm living right now, just with a lot of discomfort because of all those years, broken both of my legs. I've torn ACLs 2 or 3 times a piece, rotor cuffs 2 or 3 times a piece, tore my pec, my bicep, my shoulder, my trap, broken my jaw, my nose, my orbital socket, you name it, hands, feet. A couple ribs along the way.
It's a different kind of toughness because I have nothing but respect for MMA fighters too, but at the same time it's a different kind of toughness. We'll take Mick Foley for example, to get your ear ripped off, and you're still
yeah,
and doing oh my god, it's unbelievable.
Well, I lived with Mick Foley the night I broke my ankles. When I got to the back, that man was standing there with 2 big bags of ice, and Dustin Rhodes had 2 chairs set up for me. They didn't have to do any of that, but they were watching the monitor, and they saw what had happened. They could tell that I was hurt, So, just the kindness of them, to, whenever I got back, Mick had to literally, walk around the corner there and get bags of ice, out of the ice machine and stuff like that before I could even get this back, So just we all looked out after each other, in the injury department, when something like that happens,
That's cool. We used to have that camaraderie where everybody has each other's back in that situation.
Yeah, I'll do that now with this right here.
Speaking of injuries and toughness, now you eventually made it back to ECW, and you had an incident very early on. You broke your jaw. and then you didn't miss any time, didn't miss a match. You wrestled the next day, and it's shortly after that they got the TV title on you briefly. Do you think they put you in that position because of the toughness you showed and your willingness to work?
Yeah, that had a big part of it. I did. I broke my jaw on a Friday night at Center Stage in Atlanta. And the very next day, we were going to be going from there to Birmingham to wrestle a pay-per-view a couple of days later. This was on a Friday night, and Sunday we were doing the pay-per-view. Well, Saturday, I stayed up all night trying to find doctors. There was a flu epidemic going on down in Atlanta, so nobody considered broken jaw a life-threatening injury. So I had to wait for hours and hours in 2 different hospitals. So I just went on back to my hotel room and got on the phone and started, phone book and started calling just doctors all, of course it was late, nobody was open. One doctor actually called me back within about an hour, and I met him in Marietta about 6 o'clock in the morning, gave him 2 autographed pictures, took a couple of pictures with him, and he wired my jaw shut. And then from there I went back down to Atlanta and got me a couple of prescriptions from the CVS, took a nap, and then drove to Cornelia, Georgia with Jerry Lynn, and then we did a tag team match, enough with AJ Styles, one of the guys. And then from there I went back down to Atlanta, did an appearance, and then drove all the way to Birmingham, Alabama on Sunday morning, and told Paul if he didn't put me on the pay-per-view, then I would quit. Because he took me out, they thought I wasn't coming back, so he took me off the pay-per-view, and I showed up, and I actually had to sign waivers for the night, that if anything happened, then I wouldn't be, hold them liable. So, but he wound up letting me on the show, and we did like an 8-man tag team.
Oh, man. Now,
and I still did my flips, too.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. What's your opinion? He's kind of a lightning rod. People seem to love him or hate him, but how is your relationship with Paul Heyman?
I had a great relationship with Paul. Honestly, I never had a problem with him. He was always supportive of me from day one. He already knew who I was when I first met him, and just by word of mouth and people talking good about me. And plus, I tag teamed with Ricky Morton for a few good years, in the beginning. So that kind of elevated my name a little bit, around, the Indies and then other places, like that too. So, so when I met him, I shook his hand, and I was David Jericho back then. And it was like, well, David Jericho, how are you? And I was like, well, I'm fine, Paul Heyman, how are you? And he always kind of, Northerners, they kind of like that Southern side of people, and, so, he thought I was funny, and I thought he was funny. We both talk funny. But, he gave me an opportunity. He didn't have to. Rob Van Dam is the one who introduced us. And Rob was trying to get me in ECW for a good year before I wound up actually just taking a chance. Because I drove up. I lived in Johnson City, Tennessee. I wrestled on a Friday night in North Carolina with Rob, and Rob was like, you need to come to ECW and all this other stuff, I can at least get you a match if you show up, So I drove all the way back from Winston-Salem, North Carolina to Johnson City, which is about 4.5 hours, and I got home at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was turned on the TV, and late at night on the FSN channel, there was ECW back then. And so I watched it, and I was watching a match with Little Guido and Mikey Whipwreck, and I was like, shit, I'll do all of that. No problem. I can hang with these guys. So I called him, and I was like, when are you going to be back up in ECW? And he goes, tomorrow. That's where I'm headed right now. And I was like, all right. So I was like, give me directions. So he gave me directions. Packed me up some clothes, and just at 1:30 in the morning, I think, and then hit the road by 2, and I was there about 10 a.m. in the morning.
Now, fast forward a little bit. Now, when you got the TV title briefly, you've been in wrestling, I'm going to guess, for maybe around a little bit at that time. Did you feel like you were starting to make it at that point?
I didn't really know much about ECW at the time, honestly. But I had already had some pretty good little trips, to like Mexico and Puerto Rico and places like that. So was already, talking to people, and getting stuff set up for Japan and places like that, So, I mean, at the time I wasn't thinking I was making anything. I was just trying to stay consistent, and like Ricky and Tim always told me, whatever you do, keep your name out there. So it doesn't matter where you're wrestling, but there's always going to be somebody to report on it. So I did as many independent shows as I could do. If Mexico would take me, I'd wrestle for all of them, and then I'd drive all damn night to do a little shotgun indie show, So at that time, I wasn't thinking about making it per se. I was just trying to stay busy. But then once I was there, I realized that this is going to be a pretty big thing,
Did Paul give you the Kid Rock persona kind of thing, or how did that come about?
Yeah. I was there with Jericho, and I was there from like 95 to late 96 and broke my leg. And so I was out till 98. So when I went back, Chris Jericho had already been there since I had been gone and went to WCW. So the Jericho name was kind of, thrown out there pretty big. He gave a big identity to the name, So when I went back, they were like, let's call you something else. So at first I was going as Davey Morton and Davey Cash and a couple of other different names that they were just throwing along the way. And then one night, they did all the production out of Paul's basement at his house.
Wow.
So, yeah, this is the old school now. Like, whenever you got two TVs set up, you got the two, the recorders and the VCR and all that stuff, That's how they did it, the old school way. But anyway, MTV was playing on one of the TVs. So while they were recording the match that I just had with Easy Money, at the end of it, the tape popped out and the TV came back on, and Kid Rock video was playing on MTV. And so we both had the long hair. We had like a little bit of a look, together, the same. So I show up in Poughkeepsie, New York, and Tommy Dreamer walks by me and says hello to me. And as he's walking by, he stops and turns around, and he's like, by the way, you're no longer David Jericho, Paisano, Morton, and all that. And I'm like, okay, who am I? He goes, you are now Kid Cash. And I was like, okay. He goes, do you know who Kid Rock is? And I was like, I don't. And he goes, okay, well, do some research this week while you're home, and I want you to look like him next week. That's where I went to Hot Topic and got some baggy pants and some boxer shorts and a hat and showed up.
Love professional wrestling, but man, what a business, huh? Like, where else would that be where you're like, you're now Kid Cash and you have to go some research? And
I didn't know the whole thing behind it for years until one day Tommy Dreamer was TNA in our dressing room and then told me the story, how it all came about.
Before I move on from ECW, I got two people I want to ask you about that would have worked there. New Jack. How was New Jack?
You gotta love New Jack. Yeah. New Jack was awesome. I knew him from the Smoky Mountain wrestling days. And after he left, he went to ECW. And then shortly after that, I left and went to ECW as well. So him and Mustafa, they were had a great tag team and stuff. You just gotta know how to handle New Jack, Yeah. New Jack is New Jack, and don't try to micromanage him or anything like that. Don't try to give him advice and calm him down or anything like that. Just go with it. And, if he gets a little too crazy, then, kind of mosey along somewhere else, just don't just don't get in the way after that,
I think we've all had that friend. Just like, all right.
Yeah, but a lot of people take, New Jack is New Jack. Anybody who knows him or has ever been around him knows that he just says whatever is on his mind. When it offends people, he don't care. So, why go around him if you are going to be offended by him, So, sure. He never offended me. He liked me and we got along, and, he loved Ricky Morton to death because Ricky helped. And then they stomp out, a lot in the Smoky Mountain days. And, as far as, building his knowledge and stuff like that of the sport, and matches and things. So, we always had a good relationship. So, I never had a problem with him. He never had a problem with me, and we hug every time we see each other. I just don't go drinking with him.
That's awesome. Well, actually, okay, good. That's a good segue, because the next guy I was going to ask you was Sandman.
Sandman, I love him to death. When I first met Sandman, I didn't know what to think of him because he was just so Philadelphia. Just everything was yo. He was loud. If you ever watch a Rocky Balboa movie or something like that, he epitomizes the true Philadelphia man. You know what I mean? So he was a little bit of a shock to me at first, but he grew on me. The only thing I didn't like about him is that he did, he got drunk off of his ass, and until I figured it out, when he wasn't drunk, he couldn't wrestle.
Shit.
But when he was drunk, he wrestled, like actually pretty good. He could do arm drags, hurricanranas, and things like that. Things you would never expect him to be able to do. But the only thing I didn't like about him was, man, if you were ever in the way of him swinging that cane, you were going to hurt. Because he was drunk, he would just take your brains out. He would always hit you with the tip of that damn thing too. So. And I never understood why. I'm short, and he's got very long arms, so it's not that he couldn't hit his target, but...
I think that the fact that he wrestled better drunk, I think we just gave a new definition to the word functioning alcoholic. That's
absolutely. Yeah, it definitely was. And plus, he was a riot, too, after the matches, and back in the dressing room and, listening to him tell stories in that drunk manner of his, and... Then, of course, you would see him at the hotel bar, still going, and just there was no stop to him,
All right, so actually, one more question about ECW before we move on. Then, was there any funny road stories or anything like that come to mind with ECW times? Did you consider?
Yeah, the thing about the road stories with me, I was the only one at that time living in the South, and ECW. The one thing Paul made me, when I first went there, Paul made me pay my dues, and that's why we have a lot of respect for each other and stuff, because, I respect the fact that he made me pay my dues, and he respects the fact that I paid him, and I did it willingly. So, like, the first year, dude, I had to drive to every single fucking town. So I drove from Johnson City, Tennessee, to Philadelphia, to Allentown, to New York City, to everywhere,
Wow.
Yeah, Staten Island, Maine, Connecticut, you name it, I drove. And so by the time the shows were over with and everybody flew back home, it was taking me, and depending on where I was at, sometimes it was taking me 2 days to get home. So once I did get home, I would have about 2 days to sleep it all off, get my, laundry done and clean the house and get things ready for the next 2 days to go back out on the road. So I spent a lot of time on my own, by myself. So I didn't really, get to drive around with too many people while I was there, because I was always driving up from Tennessee, But a lot of crazy stories at the hotels. But I don't know if anybody would want me to tell those stories.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Now, I have in my notes here, too, one thing. You wrestled, if this is correct, one match in WCW, and it was like literally a week or month later, the company was bought?
Yeah. No, it wasn't even a month. It was like 2 weeks.
Wow.
I talked to WCW, John Laurinaitis, and they sent me a deal. I signed the deal. A week later, I went and did a Thunder, and had a really good match, and went home, and I had my packet, for the next week. We were going to be in Panama City. John called me the day before I was going to leave and told me to just hold off. Just a lot of things were going on, and he was going to get back to me on the next road trip. Well, then, of course, I had to watch, I was watching, and then I saw what happened. And then about 2 days later, he calls me back, and they told me that WWE bought the company, bought WCW. They had a lot of wrestlers. They had 2 companies now, so they wanted to keep me, but the conditions have changed. When I signed, Jimmy Hart kind of worked as an agent for me, and I got a really good deal, because of the ECW, fame and stuff like that. So I got a nice deal, guaranteed to hold the light heavyweight title. A couple of good years there, options to re-sign and all that stuff, and then he comes back to me and says that they want to keep me, but they need me to move to Cincinnati, Ohio. They were going to renegotiate my contract. I believe it was going to be all the way down to like 60 or 65,000, something like that. I would be called up whenever they had a position for me. And at that time, I was already like 30 years old, 31 years old. Had a house, kids, 2 kids, so I just couldn't, and why would I want to live in Cincinnati? I lived in Nashville, so it was only going to be about a 3-hour drive for me. So I could go up and stay a couple of days, but I wanted to be able to come back home. And they wanted me to stay there and train at Les Thatcher's gym, I guess do his TV, Heartland Wrestling. And I was just like, I've been in business for 11 years. Why would I need to be trained? And I was an ECW original and standout, so why would I need to be trained? So got back with Jimmy, and Hulk Hogan got in on the deal. Just suggested that it wouldn't be a good thing for my career, because the longer I was there, the more my name value would go down, until they wound up calling me up, which could be, in John Laurinaitis' words were, how the business is, kid. It could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months. Who knows? So, I was already, my name value was still going. It was still hot, and I had other offers to go to Japan and, back to Mexico and Puerto Rico and places like that. But Jimmy Hart and Hulk Hogan were starting the XWF. So I wound up saying no to WWE, and I went with Jimmy and Hulk, signed a 3-year deal with the, who was it? Gosh, it was the Home Shopping Network. Yeah. They were the benefactors of the XWF. So Jimmy got me a no-compete clause. So if the company ever went under, I would continue to keep getting paid. Yeah, or they could buy me out. So we did like 8 tapings. We did about 10, maybe, house shows, in Puerto Rico with Carlos Colon's guys, and we did some out in the Midwest with Terry Funk and them down in Texas and Oklahoma. And after that, they just got a phone call from Jimmy saying that the Home Shopping Network dropped them because some sort of India warehouse was getting taken over by China. So they took their money back. I think they put like $80 million up for that company.
Oh shit!
But so they took like 60 of it back. But I continued to keep getting paid. But within a month after that closing down, I signed with TNA. So I was getting paid from TNA, but I was also still getting a paycheck from the Home Shopping Network for 2.5 more years.
Jimmy Hart helped you out as much as he could, huh? I thought he got some good deals for you here.
Yeah, Jimmy, when I met Jimmy that was 15, 20 years ago, he just liked me, and he always offered, his help if I ever needed it, but I would call him and get advice from him, and then out of that, he would wind up, helping me or guiding me in some way. So, Jimmy, I owe Jimmy a ton in my career.
You get to TNA, and I didn't realize you had worked with Dusty Rhodes in a tag match. It was you and, now Lance Archer. I think he was going by Dallas then. Yeah. You guys were the tag champs, and it was Dusty Rhodes and James. What's it like working with Dusty Rhodes and some of those guys there?
It was great. I actually worked Dusty in quite a few matches, in singles matches too. And and it was just a great experience. Of course, it's Dusty Rhodes, man. And he was so great. He was like, "Don't change anything about you." He goes, "But there's some things that I'm just not going to do." And I'm like, "I understand." But I showed him the respect because I was brought in back in, like you said, 89 and 90, when wrestling was still in that rock and roll express phase, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so it was more the old school way. And so I knew that way. That's the way I was trained. And then over time, I developed my own style. But whenever I wrestled Dusty, I went right back to the days of me training with Ricky Morton. You know, I just let Dusty call the match, and then I added my stuff in there, you know, here and there. And I sold, and I was a heel. Whenever I was a heel, I was the old Tully Blanchard. You know what I'm saying? Growing up as a full horseman, so I kind of brought out that persona as a heel, and he just loved it. You know, he was like, "Wow," he goes, "I wasn't expecting that." You know, he said, "You didn't even do any offline stuff." No. And I was like, "Well, you don't have to." And he says, "I love you, kid." Because, you know, whenever he hears somebody say, "I don't have to," because that means that they know. Mm-hmm. They know how to work. Instead of flipping and doing all the crazy moves, they literally know how to draw a crowd by work. Mm-hmm. And we drew a crowd. I mean, we did. And I got to work with Harley Race for a few times. I was doing like a legend killer kind of a thing. Yeah. And yeah, so, I mean, I got to get punched out by Harley Race and Terry Taylor and Larry Zbyszko and Bobby Eaton. And, you know, so it's just being able to wrestle those guys and work with those guys. I mean, for me, and coming up in the era that I did, it was just, you know, for me, it was just icing on the cake on my career, you know.
How was your time in TNA overall?
The worst company I've ever worked for.
No shit.
No, really, I mean, and they know it. I still tell them all to this day, you know. Even when I went down and did those few shows, you know, they were like, oh. You know, it's a different management, you know, so no, I don't. But, no, it just wasn't a good time there. They took full advantage of everything and just a lot of stuff that, you know, you don't want people in the public to know, you know. You know, because you could get sued over it, you know.
Sure.
But, I mean, it's just a lot of trouble with them, you know. Their vision was completely different than mine and everybody else's. We just argued about, you know, money a lot and stuff. You know, they lied to you coming in, you know, because it was a new company and stuff. And, you know, I was already a star from ECW and, you know, and other places and things of that nature, you know. So I come in there and they talk all this big stuff, you know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, you know, and, you know, if you can settle for this amount for the first year, then we'll hook you up after that once we get rolling. And I did, and they never changed the pay. I had to, you know, threaten to quit a dozen times, you know, just to get, you know, a few extra $100 a week out of them, you know, and then checks weren't always on time, and then you find out that some young rookie kid that, you know, that they're using me for, and that's what they wanted. They wanted somebody with a name value to put over all these new young guys that they wanted to brand for their company. You know, so I'm making everybody look, you know, everybody I was working, make them, give them a name, basically, you know, give them an identity by wrestling and beating me, you know. So every night I'm getting beat by some young kid that nobody's ever heard of, and I'm making them a star, but yet they didn't want to pay me what I was worth, right. You know. But come to find out, they're paying the kid that I'm putting over and making a star more than me, and who's never been anywhere other than the independent scene and TNA. That's it. You know, so it was insulting, you know, and stuff. They were doing it to other people. But at that time, you know, WWE had already bought WCW, so, and they bought AWA, and they just bought everybody, right. You know, at that point. So unless you was with WWE, TNA was the only way to go. So a lot of guys just didn't even say anything. You know, they just accepted, you know, what they were given, and I just wasn't accepting it, you know. And so I quit a few times, walked out a few times, sat at home a few times. At one point I had to threaten to sue them to get my money, you know, because they wouldn't back pay you. They would, you know, give you a check this month, but then you'd go 2 months without a check. And then they would give you a check on the third month, but not back pay you for the last couple of months.
Almost like that other time didn't happen. Like you were missing that money still.
Right, exactly, you know. at this point, it's like, look, I'm a grown man. I'm not some young 20-year-old kid trying to make it in the business in this company. I've already been somewhere. I've already established my name. I've got I got a family. I got a house. I'm an adult. So my bills are important to me, and I had no problems paying my bills as a pro wrestler before I came here. Now that the little contract with Home Shopping Network had ended, I was just counting on the TNA paycheck all along, after and that just was not enough. It wasn't even remotely near enough. So they bring out T-shirts and stuff like that, and just because of the merchandise in the contract, if they brought out merchandise with your likeness on it, then they had the opportunity to roll you over on your contract. So at the end of my contract, I've already found me a job. I'm ready to go to work for somebody else, and they rolled me over on my contract. And I basically did everything but beg, Jeff to let me out of my contract. And I was like, why would you want anybody working for you that doesn't want to be here? And he looked at me and said, because it's my prerogative. And that's whenever it all ended for me. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do everything I can to get fired. And I did. I wound up getting fired. And then I went to WWE from there. And when I left WWE, they were calling me again, but it was under different management. Bruce Pritchard and guys like that were running the show, Hulk Hogan, and and just a bunch of other people, that I never thought would be running TNA,
Yeah.
So I wound up going back there again, and things were good at first, but then the paycheck thing started happening again. They would pay you, and then they wouldn't pay you for a couple of weeks, and then they wouldn't back pay you and stuff, and they would say there was no money, but yet I'm looking across the catering table at Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Kevin Nash.
Right.
I'm looking at Eric Bischoff. I'm looking at Bruce Pritchard. Somebody's getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
Why are the talent not getting paid, but yet those guys are getting paid? So it just wasn't what I was in. So I pretty much told them I wanted my release at that point, and they gave it to me this time. I didn't get fired. So.
I heard somebody say, I can't remember the wrestler's name, but they were talking about how TNA was hurting and they need to make cuts. But they didn't cut Hulk Hogan. They cut him a mid-level wrestler. And it was like that was the equivalent of we're on hard times and starving. But rather than cut out the filet mignon, we cut out the beans and the bread. Why would we?
It was because of Dixie Carter,
Yeah.
Once Jeff had been left and wasn't a part of the company anymore, she was trying to run a company that she had no idea how to run,
Yeah.
And so what she did is she counted on Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff to run her company. Now, you remember WCW, don't you?
Right.
And Ted Turner, right?
Right.
Did you not think that wouldn't happen again if you got a billionaire's pocketbook to play with? I mean, it wasn't her money; it was her dad's money.
Yeah.
So of course they're going to pay themselves. Of course they're going to re-sign themselves and give themselves signing bonuses of about $300,000.
Yeah.
Give themselves signing bonuses.
Right. I mean, I think we can look at
not for $50,000 or anything like that, but for like $300,000 and $400,000.
Yeah. It's wild.
Kevin Nash was making, I think, $750,000, and Kurt Angle was making I think the same. But Kurt was actually wrestling and being a star of the show and stuff, and Nash and those guys were just in the back, So.
How was your time in WWE before that? They gave you the Cruiserweight title. Obviously, WWE for me, it's like, even at their heyday when they were really cooking on all cylinders, they've never really been one to really push the Cruiserweight division, it feels like, though. Overall, still, though, how was your time and what was that like?
Great time. I mean, it was a good experience, and it was a completely different level. Growing up in the business, you always hear that WWE is the pinnacle of the sport. And once you're there, you finally realize what they were talking about. The atmosphere is completely different, a whole lot more professional, a lot more going on. It's just such a big company, just watching them set stage and, and their creative teams and, it's just so many people in one building at one time, trying to make this show right, ECW had a few people running the show. TNA had just a few people running the show, WWE has an entire army. It's just crazy. And, and they really put me out there pretty good. They touched on my character a whole lot better than what, TNA did, so I had a great time.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to promote? Anything you want to talk about you got going on? I know you said you're pretty much retired, but is there anything you want to get out there?
Yeah, I still do, like I said before, I still do seminars and stuff like that. So if anybody's interested in seminars or appearances, go to Kid Kash. I think it's David Kash. It's my Facebook, and just shoot me an email, and my Instagram. I think it's David Kid Kash or something like that. I don't know. But you can just look it up. It'll show you. I'm old now. I just work all day and come home and watch Fox News.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it a lot, man.
Hey, man, no worries. Anytime.
Awesome. All right. Hey, have a great night.
All right, you too, buddy. Bye.
All right, so that wraps us up for this week. Thank you again for listening to the Working Fans Podcast. So as always, you can find us on Twitter at FansWorking. Our Facebook page is Working Fans Wrestling Pod. We have email where you can reach out to us and let us know what you think also. That's workingfanswrestlingpod@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, workingfanswrestling_pod. And then as always, please continue to listen to us on Anchor.fm, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, all your major platforms. If you're following us on Apple Podcasts, which we are also on now, and YouTube, please make sure you subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It helps us bring you these podcasts when we get to talk to you and talk with you